Hey, Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Where's my hat? I forgot my hat. Now we're ready. Happy Bloomsday, everybody. I know what you're thinking. Grandpa, what is Bloomsday? I never heard of that holiday. Bloomsday happens every June 16th. The original Bloomsday, although it wasn't celebrated because the book wasn't even written until 16 years later, the original Bloomsday happened in 1904, so 119 years ago. And I'm at the Rivers Distillery in Jackson, Georgia, one of my happy places, drinking out of a Sanka cup that Todd left in Uncle Rico. And I'm sitting in Uncle Rico. I have a little different setup today. I'm gonna try this out. I'm gonna be doing some music videos also while I'm up here on Arlo. I'm on my way up to visit you, and we're gonna make a couple videos together, you and me. We'll see how that works out. Could be a disaster. I might disown you. You might be out of the will by the time the weekend comes. So I'm doing this a little bit early because we're gonna be Olive at your mom's baby shower. So all baby clothes for you and baby stuff for you. They have a party and everybody will give your mom gifts, but they'll all be things for you. Nothing there will be for your mom or your dad. So I'll be there, and your Uncle Tom and Aunt Lucy and your cousin Arlo will be there. And grandmother, she'll be there. Rivers Distillery doesn't make Irish whiskey, and that's a shame. I love Jameson's Irish whiskey. That's my Wednesday night beverage at the American Legion Club. Not because it's Irish, because it's smooth and very tasty, mellow. But one of my favorite things in the world, besides High Life, to put in my mouth is the peach brandy, dark peach brandy from Rivers Distillery. I go there just about every time that I'm on my way up to Chattanooga to visit you, Arlo. So, back to the question, what's Bloomsday? Bloomsday is named after a guy named Leopold Bloom. He was the protagonist in a book called Ulysses, written by James Joyce, in I think around 1920 or in the 1920s. It's one of those. There's some kind of books that you read, and you go, "Oh, don't tell me the end. Don't tell me the end." This is not one of them. Everybody knows the plot from page one. But it's such a long and intricate and deep book, written at so many different levels, that you don't care that you know the overlying plot. It's how you get there that counts. Spoiler alert. The plot of Ulysses is really simple. Leopold Bloom gets up in the morning. He makes breakfast for himself and his wife Molly. He puts on morning clothes, a black suit, and he leaves. He does a whole bunch of things during the day, and he doesn't even get in till I think 2 the next morning. By the time he goes to bed, it's 4 o'clock in the morning the next day. But that's all considered Bloomsday. And while that happens, he goes to a funeral. He saves a guy named Stephen Dedalus from getting beat up by these, I think they're soldiers or maybe sailors, in a place called Bawdy Town. It's the Bawdy district of Dublin. This all happens in Dublin over the less than 24 hours. We won't say in one day, but in less than 24 hours. But it's a long, long book. Like Shakespeare, everybody knew the stories. In Shakespeare, they knew the story that he was doing. As soon as the play would start, people would nudge each other and go, "Oh, they're doing they're doing this play, or they're doing that." All of his plays are based on other stories, and a lot of times he would take a bunch of them and put them together. This isn't really like that. What he did is he took it's 18 chapters, and he loosely based each chapter on a part of the Odyssey by Homer. And in the Odyssey, Odysseus leaves from Troy, where they've defeated the Trojans, and he sets sail to go home. And it should only take him a week or so to get home, but it takes him 20 years to get there. All kinds of crap happens. He runs into all kinds of crazy creatures. And so what James Joyce, the author, does in this is he compares this one day for Leopold Bloom to 20 years for Odysseus, a hero from Greek culture. He's a trickster, not a trickster god, but he's a trickster. He gets into situations and he gets himself out all the time. And now, that being said, it's loosely based on the Odyssey, but you don't have to read the Odyssey before you read Ulysses, but it helps. There are major themes in Ulysses related to Hamlet, certain other parts of Shakespeare, but basically Hamlet. You don't have to read Hamlet first before you read Ulysses, but it would help. There's a lot of biblical stuff, but you don't have to read the Bible before, but it helps if you know the Bible. And especially in Ireland, they're Roman Catholic, but they're under the control of the British government, and the British government is Protestant. But you don't have to understand Catholicism or Protestantism to understand Ulysses, but it would help. You don't have to have any kind of knowledge of British rule in Ireland, but it would help. You don't have to have any knowledge of anti-Semitism around the world. Leopold Bloom is Jewish. I believe his wife is too. I don't think they developed that, but it seems like he's an Ashkenazi Jew from Eastern Europe, and she's a Sephardic Jew, probably from someplace like Portugal or Tunisia, someplace maybe in North Africa. She lives in Gibraltar before she comes to Dublin with Leopold. So you don't have to read deeply about all those things. It'll help. But even if you know a lot about those things, you should use some study guides. And there's a ton of good ones. I'm not going to get into all of them, but just, you can go online and find plenty of good reference material. There's plenty of good YouTube videos on the book, why you should read the book, the plot of the book, the major themes of the book, the intricacies of the book. There's all kinds of good stuff. I used a study guide. I used a book of essays. And I also supplemented my reading. The reading's very difficult. I supplemented my reading with listening online. There's on YouTube, you can listen to the whole book. So every once in a while, I would start to read a chapter and go, oh, I need some help with this. And I would listen to it and see how other people thought the words were to flow and the sentences were to come together. And now I believe you can sum up Ulysses in a sentence. The everyday hero, Leopold Bloom from 1904 Dublin, is 180 degrees what we think of heroes as. And Leopold Bloom is a hero. This video would go on for 10 hours if I really got into the book in depth, or it would have to be a whole series, and it's not. I want to just celebrate Bloomsday with you. But, you know, we look back and we look at this great hero and we think, you know, where are the people like that? For the most part, they don't exist. A lot of them exist in their own minds, but they don't exist in reality. So the only thing that these people have in common, Odysseus and Leopold Bloom, is that they're wanderers and they're foreigners. Where they're wandering, they don't belong. Bloom doesn't look like an Irishman. Molly, his wife, doesn't look like an Irish woman. It says she's exotic looking and has big boobs. And she serves one role, to try to come to grips with the fact that she's in love with Leopold, but she wants other men. They had a young child that died, and for I think 9 years, the two of them have not had sex. So she decides, and you don't know if you read the book if she's done this before or if this is the first time. She does it at her house. There's flat characters, and there's really round characters. Flat characters like Blazes Boylan, the guy that Molly sleeps with during the day. He's just flat. I'm not going to get into the difference between flat and round characters. As a matter of fact, I might even do a video on that. How to read a book and what they do with characters. It is that he serves a role, and he's in the book throughout it. He goes past in a carriage at one point in time, and Leopold's always thinking about the fact that, oh, it's 4 o'clock, he's supposed to be going to my house right now, because Blazes sends a letter to Molly, and Leopold gets it and opens it. So he knows that Blazes is coming over. There's round characters. Leopold Bloom is highly developed. Stephen Dedalus, to a certain extent, highly developed. And then there's semi-round characters. They're developed to a certain extent, just enough to make James Joyce's point. And that's people like the stately, plump Buck Mulligan, who's just this Irishman who's always got a rapier wit, and he's always chattering and singing and making up stuff and making fun of the Catholic Church and making fun of Stephen Dedalus. And then there's a cast of characters. There must be hundreds of characters in the book. Some of them are just names that are mentioned. Some of them are in it. Some of them are whole chapters about. But there's just so many of them that you can't get into it. And the really cool thing is, a lot of these people were real people. He didn't change their names. He put real people's names in there, and they weren't happy about it. Also, this book was banned in the United States. It may have been banned in England when it first came out also. The book is written in many styles and switches styles, sometimes from chapter to chapter, but sometimes it seems like it kind of switches in the middle of the chapter. What kind of styles? Well, they range from, epic English narrative to a Catholicism question and answer, where, the student is reading the catechism, and they read a question, and then they think about it, and then they read the answer. There's a chapter that's written as a stage play. There's, I think, 2 chapters that are written as stream of consciousness. They always talk about chapter 3, but there's another chapter that seemed like it was also stream of consciousness. Just like you were listening to not what anybody was saying, but you were listening to what was going on in somebody's head. Sentences would stop in the middle and go on to another thought. Things were melded together. It's unbelievable. It's sort of like jazz improvisation with words. Or it was like freestyle rap on the written page, and then everything in between. There's all kinds of other styles that these things are written in. There's a myriad of jokes about all kinds of stuff. Some is highbrow and some is lowbrow. Like I said, it was banned for a while. It was hard to get the book published in a few different places around the world. It's probably the hardest book that I've ever read. Now, the best way to study Ulysses is not just to read it, but to read it out loud and to hear it out loud. That's why we have Bloomsday, which is a celebration of the book every 16th of June. So last year, grandmother and I were in Madrid, and I put this hat on and a shirt with a tie, funky tie, and kind of a funky shirt and a vest. That's not what anybody in the book kind of looked like, but I was obviously dressed on a hot summer day. I was dressed as a character, and I went out there and celebrated in Madrid because that's where we were. This year we're going to be in New Orleans, and I can't find a celebration. So I was going to do this live, but nah. Just decided to do it now. So I went out. Grandmother didn't come with me. She's not into this kind of literature. She reads a lot more than me, but it's just not her kind of book. It was a walking route around downtown. I think it started at a library. It ended at the James Joyce pub, which is owned by this really cool guy. Shout outs to him. I can't remember his name. But he kind of took us under his wings and told us all the things to do in Madrid, because we were in Madrid for 2 weeks. And so the walking route was led by actors Muriel Pernes, Raquel Vicente, and Jonathan Mellor. And they were dressed as James Joyce, Stephen Dedalus, and Molly Bloom. Now, 2 of them were Spanish and read in Spanish, and most of the people there spoke Spanish, and I don't know if they spoke English or not, but the one guy and I think he was the guy dressed as James Joyce. He was Irish, so I understood everything that he read, but I didn't really understand what anybody else was into. But it was great. And at the end of it, we went back to the pub. We had the traditional foods, and there's a certain kind of wine. It might be a Chianti that they have in the book, and some kind of a brioche or cheese or something. It doesn't matter, but everybody gets into it. Like, oh, we're having the stuff that they had that day. And then we watched a lot of stuff. There were more readings by the people that were there with us, but also we watched some readings from Dublin itself, and they were all in English. We saw some readings from other years, and it was pretty cool. I have a feeling this guy wants me. So I'm going to. I just went past. Good. So I'm going to read some sections that spoke to me, and my sections are all descriptions of people, and they're kind of there are certain kind of people. You can figure out what kind of people, but I love the way that James Joyce describes people. At many different levels. He was a brilliant writer. The first one is from chapter 2, which is the Nestor chapter. And in the Nestor chapter of the Odyssey, Telemachus, or Telemachus, however you want to pronounce it, the son of Odysseus, travels to see Nestor, who served with his father, and I think he was kind of a mentor to his father, and he wants to ask some questions of him. So he goes there and he seeks guidance, and he receives guidance. Well, in the Telemachus, or the Nestor chapter in the Odyssey, Stephen Dedalus, who plays the son of Ulysses, the son of Leopold Bloom, even though he's not really his son. They know each other. They don't know each other well until the end of the book, but they develop this relationship of father and son. So it's completely different than the Odyssey. But in this, Stephen goes to the school where he teaches, and then he goes and talks to a guy named Mr. Deasy, and Mr. Deasy is the Nestor character. And the guy talks about hoof and mouth disease and Jews. They threw you know why we didn't have to throw the Jews out of Ireland? He's like telling him a riddle. You know why we didn't have to throw the Jews out of Ireland? And he goes, no, because we never let them in. So, in this reading, Stephen Dedalus he has an interaction with a boy named Cyril Sargent. And he's a pupil, and he reminds Stephen of himself when he was young. So what happens is he excuses the boys. He's getting ready to leave. He excuses the boys. They're going to go in with Mr. Deasy, and Mr. Deasy's going to allow them to play hockey. It's some sort of a hockey with a ball. There's no skates. It's similar to girls' field hockey, but it's in a gymnasium that they play it. It's not anything they do here. It must just be something they do over in Ireland and or England. And so he excuses the boys, and this Cyril Sargent comes up to him and says he has problems doing the math problems. That the math problems are problems. and this is Joyce now. They broke asunder, sliding out of their benches, leaping them. Quickly they were gone from the lumber, and from the lumber room came the rattle of sticks and clamor of their boots and tongues. Sergeant, who alone had lingered, came forward slowly, showing an open copybook. His tangled hair and scraggy neck gave witness of unreadiness, and through his misty glasses, weak eyes looked up pleading. On his cheek, dull and bloodless, a soft stain of ink lay, date-shaped, recent and damp, recent and damp as a snail's bed. He held out his copybook. The word "Sums" was written on the headline. Beneath were sloping figures, and at the foot a crooked signature with blind loops and a blot. Cyril Sargent, his name and seal. Mr. Deasy told me to write them out all again, he said, and show them to you, sir. Stephen touched the edges of the book. Futility. Do you understand how to do them now, he asked. Numbers 11 to 15, Sergeant answered. Mr. Deasy said I was to copy them off of the board, sir. Can you do them yourself? Stephen asked. No, sir. Ugly and futile. Lean neck and tangled hair and a stain of ink, a snail's bed. Yet, someone had loved him, borne him in her arms and in her heart. But for her, the race of the world would have trampled, the race of the world would have trampled him underfoot, a squashed, boneless snail. She had loved this weak, watery blood drained from her own. She had loved his weak, watery blood drained from her own. Was that then real? The only true thing in life? His mother's prostrate body, the fire Columbanus in holy zeal bestrode. She was no more. The trembling skeleton of a twig burnt in the fire, an odor of rosewood and wetted ashes. She had saved him from being trampled underfoot and had gone, scarcely having been. A poor soul gone to heaven, and on a heath beneath, winking stars of fox, red reek of rapine in his fur, with merciless bright eyes, scraped in the earth, listened, scraped up the earth, listened, scraped, and scraped. Sitting at his side, Stephen solved out the problem. He proves by algebra that Shakespeare's ghost is Hamlet's grandfather. Sergeant peered askance through his slanted glasses. Hockey sticks rattled in the lumber room. The hollow knock of a ball and the calls from the field. Let me just interject this. This is so boring to Stephen that he's thinking about this problem that he's solved. That by algebra, that Shakespeare's ghost is Hamlet's grandfather. I'm not going to get into it, and he's listening to all that's going on in the other room while he's doing this. Across the page, the symbols moved in grave Maurice, in the mummery of their letters, wearing quaint caps of squares and cubes. Give hands, traverse, bow to partner, so. Imps of fancy of the Moors, gone too from the world, Averroes and Moses Maimonides, dark men of mien and movement, flashing in their mocking mirrors the obscure soul of the world, a darkness shining in brightness, which brightness could not comprehend. Do you understand now? Can you work the second for yourself? Yes, sir. In long, shady strokes, Sergeant copied the data. Waiting always for a word of help, his hand moved faithfully the unsteady symbols, a faint hue of shame flickering behind his dull skin. Amor matris, subjective and objective, genitive, with weak blood and whey sour milk, she had fed him and hid from sight of others his swaddling bands. Like him was I, these sloping shoulders, this gracelessness. My childhood bends beside me, too far for me to lay a hand there once or lightly. Mine is far, and his secret as our eyes. Secrets, silent, stony, sit in the dark palaces of both our hearts. Secrets weary of their tyranny, tyrants willing to be dethroned. The sum was done. It is very simple, Stephen said as he stood up. Yes, sir. Thanks, Sergeant answered. He dried the page with a sheet of thin blotting paper and carried his copybook back to his desk. You had better get your stick and go out to the others, Stephen said, as he followed towards the door of the boy's graceless form. Yes, sir. That was a long one, but it's some of the best writing that I've ever read. And if you put Shakespeare aside, yeah. No, there's some Hemingway too. And probably some people that I don't even know. I haven't read that many. There's a chapter called The Oxen of the Sun. And I don't have a reading from it, but I wanted to mention it. It's the chapter where I realized what a comedic genius this man was. Leopold Bloom is a caring individual. And there's a lady in this who goes to a maternity hospital to give birth. Her name is Myrna Purefoy. Leopold, during, I think, the late afternoon, goes to this hospital. And when he gets there, there's a drunken party going on somewhere in the hospital. It doesn't really tell you why or exactly where in the hospital, but Buck Mulligan and Stephen Dedalus is there. I think that's where he winds up first running into Stephen. And another reason that I mentioned it is it was one that I read and went, maybe I'm not getting this. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I listened to a YouTube video of it, The Oxen of the Sun chapter. Chapter 15 is Circe. And in Homer, Circe is an enchantress. She turns some of Odysseus's men into pigs. In Ulysses, Bloom follows Stephen into Night Town, also known as Bawdy Town, the red light district. And it reads like a play. This passage describes one of the residents of Bawdy Town, because it was not just a red light district. There were people that lived there. They were poor people. That part of town is never like a good neighborhood. It shouldn't be anyway. This reads like a play, and but anyway, it describes this one inhabitant and also this general street scene that's going on, because there's whole crowds of people walking up and down the street. Remember, it's a play. So when a character speaks, I'll say who they are, and then I'll say says. The Mabat Street entrance to Nighttown, before which stretches an uncobbled transsiding set with skeleton tracks, red and green will-o'-the-wisps, and danger signals. Rows of flimsy houses with gaping doors. Rare lamps with faint rainbow fans. Round Rabioti's halted ice gondola stunted men and women squabble. They grab wafers between which are wedged lumps of coal and copper snow. Sucking, they scatter slowly. Children, the swam comb of the gondola. High-reared, forges on through the murk, white and blue under a lighthouse. Whistles call and answer. The calls say, "Wait, my love, and I'll be with you." The answers say, "Round behind the stable." A deaf-mute idiot with goggle eyes, his shapeless mouth dribbling, jerks past, shaken in St. Vitus dance. A chain of children's hands imprisoned him. So there's a child known as the idiot, right? So we know where this is going. And the other kids are messing with him. Imagine that. The children say, "Kistoguel, salute." The idiot lifts a palsied left arm and gurgles and says, "Garugahugah." The children say, "Where's the great light?" The idiot, gobbing, says, "Gagahest." They release him. He jerks on. A pygmy woman swings on a rope slung between the railings, counting. A form sprawled against a dustbin and muffled by its arm and hat moves, groans, grinding, growling teeth, and snores again. On a step, a gnome, totting among a rubbish tip, crouches to shoulder a sack of rags and bones. A crone standing by with smoky oil lamp rams the last bottle in the maw of his sack. He leaves his booty, tugs askew his peaked cap, and hobbles off mutely. The crone makes back for her lair, swaying her lamp. A bandy child, a squat on the doorstep with a paper shuttlecock, crawls sidling after her in spurts, clutches her skirt, scrambles up. A drunken navvy ups with both hands the railings of an area, lurching heavily. At a corner, two night watch in shoulder capes, their hands upon their staff holsters, loom tall. That's the popo. A plate crashes. A woman screams. A child wails. Oaths of a man roar, mutter, and cease. Figures wander, lurk, peer from warrens. In a room lit by a candle stuck in a bottleneck, a slut combs out the tats from the hair of her scrofulous child. Sissy Caffrey's voice, still young, sings shrill from a lane. So Sissy Caffrey was in the previous chapter. So if you're reading the book, you know who Sissy Caffrey is. I gave it to Molly because she was jolly. The leg of the duck, the leg of the duck. Chapter 17 is called Ithaca. Ithaca is Odysseus' home. It's where he left from more than 20 years ago. I forget how long they're in Troy. They may have been in Troy for 5 years or 10 years. I forget. what happens in the Odyssey is, while he's gone, all these suitors come. He was a very wealthy man. So all these suitors come and try to get with the wife, because they say, well, you're a widow, he's never coming back. And so you need me to take over the kingdom here, because he had his own little fiefdom. But she's faithful. She fights these guys off. Telemachus, the son, fights them off. And then Odysseus comes home. I won't tell the whole story, because this is about the readings. Well, in the chapter 17, the Ithaca chapter of Ulysses, Stephen Daedalus comes home with Leopold to Leopold's house. And they talk about a lot of things. This is the one that reads like a catechism. So there's going to be questions and then there's going to be answers. I particularly like the description of women. And here it is. What special affinities appeared to him to exist between the moon and woman? And here's the answer. Her antiquity in preceding and surviving successive Tellurian generations, her nocturnal predominance, her satellitic dependence, her luminary reflection, her constancy under all her phases, rising and setting by her appointed times, waxing and waning, the forced invariability of her aspect, her indeterminate response to inaffirmative interrogation, her potency over effluent and refluent waters, her power to enamor, to mortify, to invest with beauty, to render insane, to incite to and aid delinquency, the tranquil inscrutability of her visage, the terribility of her isolated, dominant, implacable, resplendent propinquity, her omens of tempest and of calm, the stimulation of her light, her motion and her presence, the admonition of her craters, her arid seas, her silence, her splendor when visible, her attraction when invisible. Get the book, read it, and parse that. Just write each thing down and say, what is he talking about? I could have done an hour and a half just on this passage. But it's spot on. It's spot on, but don't read it to your grandmother. I'm going to deny that I ever said this. I'm going to destroy I'll take the video down from YouTube if you ever read this passage to her. Because she will get it. She'll get it right up front. She won't have to parse anything. So there's one point as the evening's wrapping up, and it's, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the morning or something, almost 4 o'clock in the morning. Leopold and Stephen are standing in the garden, and they both have to pee. So they pee, they're standing next to each other, just like if they were in a urinal, standing at 2 urinals next to each other. And here's the questions and answers from the Catechism. Were they indefinitely inactive? At Stephen's suggestion, this is the answer, at Stephen's suggestion, at Bloom's instigation, both, first Stephen, then Bloom, in penumbra urinated, their sides continuous, their organs of micturition reciprocally rendered invisible by manual circumposition, their gazes, first Bloom's, then Stephen's, elevated to the projected luminous and semi-luminous shadow. And the question is, one word, similarly? The trajectories of their first sequent, then simultaneous urinations were dissimilar. Bloom's longer, less irregular, in the incomplete form of the bifurcated penultimate alphabetical letter, who in this ultimate year at high school, 1880, had been capable of attaining the point of greatest attitude against the whole concurrent strength of the institution, 210 scholars, Stevens higher, more sibilant, who in the ultimate hours of the previous day had augmented by diuretic consumption and insistent vesical pressure. Once again, even you, Frank, at almost 22 years old, you're going to have to look up a lot of stuff. But this is pretty funny. They're talking about the trajectory of their P. Which P is going further, which is going higher. And there's, I think that the one part is saying that Stephen beat 210 of his classmates in a peeing contest. Olive, girls never have peeing contests. Ask your mom. Ask your grandma. No, don't ask your grandma. Don't, whatever you do, don't ask your grandma. Here's the catechism question. What different problems presented themselves to each concerning the invisible, audible, collateral organ of the other? To Bloom, there's the answer. To Bloom, the problems of irritability, tumescence, rigidity, reactivity, dimension, sanitariness, and pelosity. To Stephen, the problem of the sacerdotal integrity of Jesus circumcised in January, holiday of obligation to hear Mass and abstain from unnecessary servile work, and the problem as to whether the divine prepuce, the carnal bridal ring of the Holy Roman Catholic Apostolic Church, conserved in Calcutta, were deserving of simple hyperduly of the fourth degree of latria accorded to the abscission of such divine excrescences as hair and toenails. I went in order by the chapter numbers, but that, like I say, you're going to have to look up a lot of words. He's using all these scholarly words. He's using catechistic words. But it's funny as crap. In closing, this is an amazing book. It took me 2 years to finish it. That being said, it actually took me more than 2 years, but 11 of those months, it was sitting in the bathroom in Jacksonville Beach, and I was in Europe and Africa. So I didn't take it with me and try to read it. First I was going to do that, and I said, no, I'm not going to play that game. It didn't feel like a one-day journey to me, like Leopold Bloom's Ulysses. It seemed more like a 20-year journey, like Odysseus' trip from Troy back to Ithaca. Like I said before, it's probably the hardest book I ever read. Shakespeare's hard, but it's hard in a different way. Shakespeare's hard because he's writing like it's 1603 or 1590, depending on the play that you're reading, because that's when it was. They were talking the same in 1920 as we talk today. So James Joyce was writing in the English that I know, but at a really, really high level. And I'm glad I finally read it. I'm glad I'm done, but I'm glad I finally read it. It was a real blessing to me. It's a weird book. And happy Bloomsday. Peace out.